Canada is standing right up there with all of our allies, our like-minded countries, to do everything that we can diplomatically to avert another military invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I think that Ukrainians have to stop saying that they lack progress. Ukraine was taking that leadership and behaving in the way that a responsible country does in the international arena. It is a very painful issue, but it's not a complicated issue. It's actually really straightforward. And if you want to go to Canada to work, apply for a visa that allows you to work.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ukrainian Press is glad to welcome you in this new year with the continuation of our classic project Persona Grata. And today we are talking to a very special guest, a very good friend for both Ukraine and our analytical center. Please welcome Her Excellency Ms. Larissa Galadza, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Canada to Ukraine. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
It's a pleasure having you with us. Well, my first question is somewhat a specific one. You're a representative of a respectable Ukrainian-Canadian family. Some of my colleagues also mentioned that your assignment is a sign of influence of Ukrainian diaspora in Canada and is a sign of good relations between two countries. Can you specify, please, does diaspora indeed has a substantial influence on Canadian foreign and maybe internal policy?
Thank you. I'm going to answer the question about the diaspora first, but I don't want it to be assumed that I'm here because the diaspora has a lot of influence, and I'll explain that after. A lot of Ukrainians know that there's over 1.3 million Canadians who trace their ancestry to Ukraine, and that is a potужна diaspora. The diaspora in Canada is also extremely well organized, and I'm very proud of that. Even though I have nothing to do with it, I'm proud to work with them as partners in this work. And that diaspora, they are powerful because they're effective. They're effective because they're well organized. They're well organized because they are smart, committed people who understand what's relevant for Ukraine and for Canada. Do they drive foreign policy? No, they don't, because Canadian public interest overall drives foreign policy. Does the diaspora have an important role to play in maintaining a focus on Ukraine within the framework of that foreign policy? Absolutely, and they do this. Extremely well. And like I said, they are. I'm proud to work with them. My own background, my own family, I consider myself the product of a family that maintained strong traditions, especially as relates to the faith. I am a product of a society that invests in public education and public health care so that even immigrant families can realize their full potential, and children like me. And I'm a product of an institution, the Public Service of Canada, that hires and promotes people on the basis of merit. And it just so happens that my entire career and the experiences that I've had in my career lend themselves to the issues that are important for Canada in Ukraine: defense and security, immigration, trade. And so I'm here after 25 years of that kind of a career, and I think the icing on the cake is the fact that I happen to speak Ukrainian, and through that connection am able to understand in maybe a deeper way than some of my colleagues what's at stake for Ukrainians, what's at stake for a relationship, and why this is such a special relationship for Canada.
Well, that's a great icing for a diplomat. I'd like to stick with Canadian policy for one more question. Last year there was a big election, and of course we still had Justin Trudeau as a prime minister, we still had the Liberal minority government, but will the course change? Does the old parties will bring something new to our bilateral relations? What is the foreign policy agenda for the new government?
You're right. There was an election this past fall. There was also an election in the year that my appointment was going through in the fall of 2019, and I think someone told me sums it up very well. Your question about continuity. We didn't know whether it would be a liberal or a conservative government. The polls were very, very close going into that election, and I knew that I would likely be coming to Ukraine. And a colleague of mine said, "Larissa, you're really lucky. You're going to go to Ukraine as ambassador for Canada under a government that either loves Ukraine or really loves Ukraine." And I can't tell you which is which, but that I think encapsulates the nature of the foreign policy towards Ukraine. It is consistent. Ukraine has often had unanimous support in Parliament when it comes to issues of the trade agreement, of recognizing the Holodomor as genocide. So I hope that Ukrainians feel this consistent and strong support from the government of Canada, regardless of which party's in power.
That's for sure. And let us continue with the pleasure topics. You mentioned the trade negotiations in our agreement, because as far as I'm concerned, last summer we also managed to expand and enhance our free trade agreement, and it's already 4 years old, which is great for more modern documents, for modern international agreements. Has this agreement brought anticipated changes in our relations and economies? Because it was a hard pandemic year, this nearly third hard pandemic year, and we're still trying to work something new. We're still trying to enhance our trade and our relation. So, does it meet the anticipated changes?
So the agreement that was signed in 2017 was really important because these kinds of agreements they create a door for business to walk through. One way and the other. They create the conditions that businesses are looking for. And 99.9% of the tariffs that Canada had on Ukrainian imports were dropped immediately, and similarly for Ukrainian imports from Canada, the tariffs were eliminated. So right there, favorable conditions created, and then business needs to walk through that door. And that's what we continue to support. We have a team we've got a senior trade commissioner here and a team of 4 trade commissioners who constantly work to make those connections. What we're really pleased to have seen was that the agreement didn't just result in a deepening of the trade relationship, but a broadening of it as well. The trade relationship expanded into new areas of trade in goods. Where does it need to go next? Trade and services, and that's what the modernization is about. So that's going to be underway soon, and that is an area I think for expansion. Ukrainian companies, Ukrainians are known as leaders in IT. Canada is known as a leader in banking. These are both services not currently covered under the agreement, and we hope to expand it that way. And it's an example of how we're always looking for small and big ways to enhance the relationship. So yeah, it's performing. It has had its results, and there's absolutely room for more growth, and that's what we work for all the time.
Well, that sounds optimistic. That makes me proud of my country.
Absolutely.
But we also should understand here in Ukraine, first of all, that the prerequisite for any good economic relations are reforms. And we all know, we all appreciate that Canada is adamant supporter of Ukrainian reforms, is definitely one of the biggest international supporters, especially when we speak about judicial and anti-oligarchization reforms. One of your interviews last year concerning the anti-oligarch law and all the subsequent events, you stated there that is not a specific category of people that are to be constrained, but specific kinds of illicit activities. And this interview became very popular in Ukraine. So, How do you see the performance of this reform? Is it going the right way, or is it going at least somewhere?
I was surprised at how those comments got picked up, because I understand that de-oligarchization is very popular in Ukraine as well, and I think that the motives and the intent behind it is correct. Every country, every democratic country, needs to have a system of checks and balances on power, including on the power of individuals who have a lot of money to influence the state's decisions. The state should be making decisions that are in the interests of all the people. In Canada, that system of checks and balances includes laws on lobbying. If you're representing a company and you're on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, you have to register that meeting. Who are you? Who are you talking to, and for what purpose? And it's open and transparent. We have laws on political financing. To make sure that one interest doesn't suddenly hold a political power. We also have a very strong parliamentary officer, the ethics commissioner. If someone believes that there might be a conflict of interest on the part of a politician, on the part of a minister, there is a body you can go to who will adjudicate this, and there is that body has the trust of the people. That's the system that we have. Ukraine is aiming for the same thing. I do believe every country has a different system, and I think time will tell whether the approach is the effective one for Ukraine, and there will always be time for adjustment if it doesn't work the way that the government intends for it to work.
Yes, but what do we lack to perform in our reform? Because it has been already 7 or even 8 years of our trying to get better, trying to enhance something, but why do we still lack progress?
Yeah, see, I disagree. I think that Ukrainians have to stop saying that they lack progress. I think that more time needs to be taken to celebrate the progress that has been made and celebrate the accomplishments. If I look at decentralization, elections reform, land reform, and judicial reform, 2021 was a huge year for judicial reform. The anti-corruption reforms, sure, none of it is perfect, but every country is working to perfect their systems, and so I think progress is being made. You want to go further faster, I think there are a few things that could be strengthened. First of all, institutions that self-generate reform and change. In Canada, our public institutions, we have units in them that look for how do we make things better, whether it's trade or visa policy. So those institutions need to have that culture instilled in them that it's okay to change. You don't just have to protect the status quo. The second thing I think, and I've seen this developing even since I got here, is the culture of continuity. That with every new government, every new administration, every new minister, you can't be making a shift. There needs to be a plan. And to the extent that Ukraine has chosen the path of Euro-Atlantic integration and accession to the European Union, there's more or less a blueprint for the direction of the reforms. There needs to be continuity in that between ministers. And when we see a constant change of ministers, which we have in our system as well, by the way, or can happen in our system, the thing that ensures that continuity is the institution. I think that Ukraine could also use some peace and some butting out by some of its neighbors, its biggest neighbor in particular. And when you look at what Ukraine is doing to fundamentally transform its system of governance at the same time that it is fighting a war, a conventional war, an unconventional war, an information war, a hybrid war, a cyber war, it's remarkable. And I have the deepest respect for the efforts being made by all the people in this country to keep on going with those reforms despite everything else that the country and the people are up against. So I am optimistic about the progress that has been made. I'm optimistic about what more can be done, and I think that the progress that has been made in these conditions deserves an awful lot of respect.
And if we continue with the condition, with the deterrence of Russian aggression against Ukraine, last year was also marked by the biggest event during the independence of Ukraine, the biggest international forum, which is the Crimean platform. And I'm glad that Canada was one of the countries to establish the forum, to be one of the founding, I should say fathers, but maybe founding countries of the forum. But still, there is a lot of pessimism, just like with the issue of reforms in Ukraine, that Crimean platform was just one-time event, that it was a big declarative informational something to restart the issue of Crimea on international agenda. But what do you think? Does it has the potential to fulfill its objectives, to deoccupy and reintegrate Crimea? So is the end goal achievable?
Canada was very proud to be one of the 40-some countries that signed on to the Crimea platform in August. And we did it because that's how we operate in the international environment. We find the countries that are like-minded, that have the same values, the same respect for the international rules-based order and international law, and we band with them to advance the changes that we want to see in the world. And so this was an instance where Ukraine was taking that leadership and behaving in the way that a responsible country does in the international arena. And it brought attention to a really important issue, an issue of critical importance not just to Ukraine, but to the entire world that wants to believe in the sovereignty of international borders, believe that that is sacrosanct. And pulled together a major summit to make that statement and to create the platform, the organizing principle for how those issues are going to be pursued over the short, medium, and long term. So it is both a statement and a way to pursue that ultimate objective, to organize all of the resources around the world that are looking at breaches of international law, looking at human rights, interested in the preservation of heritage and ecological sites. So all of that is being done within this platform. It's an important organizing principle for parliaments, for governments, and for experts. So it'll keep us all organized and make the most of the resources that we have. Some countries, when they want to call attention to an issue, bring 100,000 troops to the border. Responsible countries talk, come together, and find and use the mechanisms of the international system to advance their agenda, and that's precisely what Ukraine is doing with the Crimea platform.
So there is a definite chance to achieve its goals.
Absolutely.
But apart from Russia, we also have some other, let's say, difficult issue in international relations. Both Ukraine and Canada and other partner countries are still struggling to get Iran responsible for the deeds with the airline crash, which was, if I'm not mistaken, more than a year ago. But several days ago there were some developments. Let me quote, a Canadian court has ordered Iran to pay $48 million plus interest to the families of 6 people who died when a passenger plane was shot in Tehran in 2020. And on January the 6th, all affected countries announced their abandonment of a 2-year effort to negotiate with Tehran. It's a complicated issue. It's a very painful issue both for Canada and for Ukraine. So what our next steps will we sue Tehran? Will we continue international pressure, or what shall we do?
You're right, it is a very painful issue, but it's not a complicated issue. It's actually really straightforward. And the problem here is that, Iran isn't being straightforward. It's been 2 years. On January 8th, I continued to meet and correspond with families and was with them at a memorial here at a park on the Dnipro River. And the grief remains palpable. And that, I think, will never go away. I'm always struck also, though, by the tenacity and their fierce commitment to truth, to justice, and to accountability. And the countries mostly affected by their citizens dying in this incident have stood also firmly together, seeking truth, justice, and accountability. And the International Response Coordination Group has been the international face to try to negotiate with Iran. Iran doesn't want to do it. It is straightforward, and Iran doesn't want to go for it. So Iran is trying to split that resolve and deal bilaterally. And the countries know that, as with everything, we are stronger together, and so we're sticking together in this. And again, Canada, Ukraine, and Sweden and the United Kingdom in this case will be using the tools that the international system has created for resolving disputes to take the next steps. And what they are exactly, I don't know, but they will be fully in line with international law and using the tools that the international community has at its disposal.
I'm glad to hear it. As for now, my interview was some kind of a sweet sandwich. We started with the sweetest and the most pleasant topics, then we proceed with the hard middle, and now I'll return ourselves for the sweet part once again.
Okay.
And now I'd like to ask you one of the most popular among our audience and among experts, but also one of the most populist questions. I asked this question previously from Ambassador of the United Kingdom, and I'd like to also ask you, visa-free regime with Ukraine, is it a decent possibility or a distant future?
You said this was a sweet question.
But it's not.
It's popular for sure. You're right, I get asked about it everywhere I go. You know, in one of my previous jobs, I was responsible for visa policy, for Canada's visa policy, and I traveled to many countries where a visa was a requirement, because actually the visa requirement is a rule in Canada and not an exception. And I was struck by how personally people take the visa requirement, and that was an important lesson to me, and I get it. I understand. It would be like, you know, being asked to go through a metal detector when you're going to your friend's home for dinner. So I understand the desire, and I understand the commitment that I think every Ukrainian has to have visa-free travel to Canada. As I said, the visa requirement is the rule and not the exception. The rules surrounding everything in immigration in Canada are very strong, and they're strong for a reason, because we're a country of immigrants, and it all needs to be managed. Last year, over 1%, we added 1% of our population with immigrants, the highest number of immigrants ever to Canada, and we're really proud of that. And so we want people to come to Canada, including Ukrainians. And we're working, both Canada and Ukraine, to facilitate that movement of people back and forth. The rules are there, but they can always be improved, and the understanding of the rules can always be improved. We're working hard right now to bring down the level of refusal for Ukrainians who want to go. And we've done a really big analysis, actually, of why does our visa system refuse visas for such a number of Ukrainians. And it has to do, and so we have if you go on the Facebook site of the embassy, you will see about 8 or 9 little tutorials that can help you understand what some of the basic errors are that people make, and some of the basic things that people should understand. For instance, if you want to go to Canada to work, apply for a visa that allows you to work. If you want to go to Canada as a tourist, then go as a tourist and come back. We want to avoid those things that can happen that are considered a violation of the rules. Everyone is welcome to come to Canada through the right channels. And we can focus on the visa refusal rate, but we could look at it the other way and say over 75% of people who apply for a visa get it, and that's great. We are not stopping there. We want to get it higher and higher and higher, and I think we can only do that with the help and the understanding of Ukrainians who want to go to Canada to study, to work, to visit. To check out business opportunities, to build their networks, if they do that through the proper channels.
For all fields of our life, for all fields of our social activities, and especially for visa traveling, the third year of pandemic was another harsh experience. Well, it's not the first one, because the first one was definitely a disaster for international trade, international relations and travel, and now we are more accustomed to the new reality. But still, what does these 3 years brought to Ukrainian-Canadian relations, both good and bad?
You're right. These aren't the 3 years that any of us expected. We did have some trade growth, though. It wasn't entirely a disaster, and we're pretty happy with that. What did it bring? Firstly, I think the whole world got used to communicating in different ways, and I think that we have in the last 3 years had an unprecedented number of high-level, or 2 years, high-level conversations between Prime Minister Trudeau and President Zelensky, and between our foreign ministers. Everyone is more used to doing the things over the video and not waiting for a major visit to reach out and connect. We're more used to that. It has become the norm, and we're using that norm in the Canada-Ukraine relationship. We even established, actually, a new working group on mobility. It was all done virtually, but it was established, and it's working, and it's doing some important things. I think a second thing that it brought us is a demonstration. It proved to us, as the embassy here that runs a whole lot of programs and projects, that the partners we have in this country are excellent. The pace, the momentum did not stop. When the pandemic hit, everyone readjusted in creative ways, in important ways. They shifted their focus if that was needed. And on our side, we facilitated that. We went back, we looked at our funding agreements, we made sure that we could pay for personal protective equipment, pay for laptops. One example, we have groups, organizations we support that work with marginalized people in small communities. And when lockdown happened, when those people couldn't leave their homes, how were they to stay connected? And so, we allowed our partners, with the funding that we give them, to buy computers. Maybe something we wouldn't have otherwise done, but they did, and so people could stay connected. Across the board, our partners adjusted and proved to us that we are working with the right people in this country to achieve our mutual objectives. I think the other thing that the pandemic brought is a lot of Canadian diplomats holidaying all over Ukraine because we weren't able to leave the country. And so we have spent the last 2 years sharing stories and exchanging tips about great places to visit in Ukraine, and that is something that maybe we wouldn't have otherwise spent as much time doing, but I think it really has served to connect us more to the country and given us a great feel for the people.
Well, then I'm thrilled to ask, what are your go-to list in Ukraine?
Oh my goodness.
Maybe some 2 to 3 places.
I have traveled several times to Poltava, several times to Odessa, several times to Lviv. Still many other places to go, but I've holidayed in all those spots, and and always by road. You know, Canadians love road trips. I love road trips. Getting in the car and setting out and maybe seeing something interesting off the highway and going and seeing what's there, eating in a roadside shack that serves serving up shashlik or a wog dog. This is all part of the local experience. So I love the road trip.
For sure. And during my questions during the interview, I tried to run through all the issues, but I definitely missed something out. And that is why I'd like to ask you, maybe you could name 3 major victories and 3 major defeats of our relations during the last year.
Victories and defeats are very dramatic and absolute.
Well, it's an interview. It has to be dramatic.
Good. Yeah, you're right. I'm going to dull your dramatism a little bit and talk more about accomplishments,
Yes.
so that I don't have to talk about defeats. Maybe I can talk about disappointments instead of defeats. First of all, what I'll talk about, these are not my accomplishments. The accomplishments of the entire embassy team here, and there are 70 of us that work on this day in and day out, and over the last 2 years, the first accomplishment I want to highlight is that we have not stopped functioning. Everything that we planned to do and more got done, and we dealt with the pandemic. Operation Unifier, Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces long-standing training mission here in Ukraine, did not miss a beat. They continued to rotate in and out. They continued to do their training. They continued to support reform in the Ministry of Defense, even as they often had COVID themselves, even as they were dealing with military units that were dealing with that had the virus. So that didn't stop. We continued to advance the interests of Canadian investors in court. We had some important court cases going through, and we saw them through, and we saw some really important victories for our Canadian companies. So nothing stopped. The second thing, I've already talked about it actually, was the pivot that happened when COVID hit, and how we were able to change how we worked in order to accomplish our objectives. And the third thing would be the rallying of that high level support and high level collaboration on some really major pieces that are core to Ukrainians' values and Canadians' values and the international system. PS 752, the downing of the Ukraine International Airlines flight. We talked about it. We have stood solid with Ukraine and have been very grateful to Ukraine for all that it has done on that file. the Crimea platform, major initiative, and we were happy to stand with Ukraine on that. Together, Ukraine joined Canada in a coalition that supports media freedoms and speaks out about the importance of a free and independent media in democratic countries and in global security. We stood up the Mobility Working Group. These are all new things that we did during this crazy pandemic. And finally, of course, there's the security situation that we're living through now, that Ukrainians are living through now, where Canada is standing right up there with all of our allies, our like-minded countries, to do everything that we can diplomatically to avert another military invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So those are all I think accomplishments by the embassy, by our Ukrainian partners, and by, I would say, also Canadian diplomats in other stations, in Vienna at the OSCE, in Brussels at NATO, in New York at the UN, in Geneva at the UN, and of course in Ottawa. I'm really pleased and proud that throughout our foreign service, throughout our international network of diplomatic missions, Canadian diplomats understand what's going on here in Ukraine and are always at the front of the line in speaking up for Ukraine. So that was, I think, those are three big accomplishments that we've had together. The disappointments, they're more personal, I think, than anything. I love being with people and just the ability to be with people in a carefree way, to invite people to my home, to sing with people. All of that has been really tampered, and it's I've felt that as a loss personally. As an ambassador, I think every ambassador loves celebrating Canada Day in their country, in their host country. It's a time to show off, to be immensely proud, and we haven't been able to do that. I haven't been able to do that yet in my 2 years here. But we've just celebrated 30 years of Canada recognizing Ukraine's independence in December. At the end of January, on January 27th, we celebrate 30 years of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Canada and Ukraine, and we are going to mark that occasion. We will have a reception and we will invite our dearest partners and friends, people that we've worked with for 6 months and some for 30 years. So I think it'll be important, even in these difficult times, to take a moment to mark that accomplishment and to celebrate the fact that despite all the difficulties, despite all the different governments, and despite all of the different security situations and a pandemic, this relationship has done nothing but grow, be consistent in its commitment to each other, and that is that's worth celebrating on the 27th of January.
And we do truly feel your support and your commitment to the cause. And to that extent, my final question will consider the latest issues, the latest grand week of summits, of international meetings, both at NATO, OSCE level, and bilateral meeting of US and Russia delegations. Well, it concluded in basically nothing new. Russia did not de-escalate. They presented their ultimatum, they presented their position. The West definitely stand firm with Ukrainian interest, with nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, nothing about Europe without Europe, and nothing about NATO without NATO. So, what's next? What's on the agenda? Russia is still here, unfortunately. They're still escalating. They're trying to push us to some unfavorable decisions. What are our next steps as partner countries?
I'm watching this the way that you are, and the way that I'm sure most people in Ukraine, in Canada, many parts of Europe are as well. Um, what was important was the dialogue, the ability to, for Canada and its allies and its closest friends to stand really strongly together and stand for the principles that we believe in, the principles that unite us, and the principles that we not believe but we know make for a safer and more secure world. I think we now, after this week, we need to take a collective deep breath, and we need to give those talks some time to settle out. Certainly, I'm not jumping to any conclusions yet, and I think that we have Canada, the United States, and all of our NATO allies have been very careful and deliberate. We will continue to be careful and deliberate, continue to push for that dialogue, push for the diplomatic track to be the way that change is made in and that peace is brought to this part of the world. I have faith in it. I know how hard people are working for that, and so we will continue to watch those diplomatic efforts and hope for the best.
So let us hope and work together for this. And concerning our talk, let us conclude with something more general. Maybe there is something I forgot to ask you, or something that I unintentionally omit, or is there something you want to address to Ukrainian expert community and Ukrainian policymakers?
Thank you. You know, I've done a lot of reflecting on 30 years of partnership, and if I have to point to a couple of threads, very positive, I think, threads, things that really tie us, tie Canada and Ukraine together, there would be three, and maybe that's where I will conclude. The first is, from the very moment of Ukraine's independence, the actions that Canada and Canadians took to support democracy in Ukraine. And from that very moment until the most recent elections, I think they were in Cherkasy and Kherson and elsewhere, Canada has always been present to Ukraine as observers, major electoral observation missions, as experts, and as supporters, financiers of a continuously improving system for elections in Ukraine. I think that's something that has never stopped, and it's a commitment that we see at the political level. We see it as a financial commitment through our programming, and we see it on the level of Canadian society. Canadians, when it's time to go and observe an election in Ukraine, Canadians of all backgrounds sign up to do so. And I've met them. I've met them here, I've met them in Canada, and they all have great memories. And then that's also where the Ukrainian-Canadian community comes in. So it is a kind of a whole of country thing that we do is support, and always on the front lines of what's the next way that we can support Ukraine in improving its formal democratic processes. So in the last election, it was about supporting women candidates to make sure that they had the training and the support that they needed to step forward and put their name on the ballot. The second thread, I think, is our long-standing engagement with the Ukrainian armed forces. Again, from the earliest days of Ukrainian independence, Ukraine was a partner country under the Military Training Assistance Program, as it was called back then in the 1990s. And consistently throughout, there have been, whether it's language lessons, whether it's professional trips. You know, I remember once, probably 18 or 20 years ago, giving talks on resource management in Canada and how we do resource management in the field of defense procurement in particular. And it was to an international audience. There were 4 Ukrainians there. So at so many levels, we've had these ties. And in the last 6 years, the major commitment of Operation Unifier and the 200 men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, 200 men and women from across Canada, rotate in here and live here for 6 months at a time. They get to know their partners. They continue the mission where the previous rotation left off. They provide the tactical training. They provide the advice. They look for new opportunities. And this is another way in which this relationship spans decades. And we never tire of improving, perfecting, and looking for new opportunities. And the final thread is that movement of people back and forth that never stops, and that is the lifeblood of this relationship, and something that we want to make easier, in particular for young people. And that's why another initiative that we have in the works right now is a youth mobility agreement. It is wonderful when young people have an opportunity to go and live in a very different place and discover themselves as people, discover the world, and then go back home. And so the Youth Mobility Agreement, I'm excited about what it offers. It will offer Ukrainian young people. I'm more excited about what it will offer Canadian young people to come to Ukraine, to see the beauty and the innovation and the energy and the tradition and the landscape and everything that this country has to offer. Learn, experience, love, and then go home and make the best of that experience and who you become as a person, who they become as Canadians, and what their tie remains to Ukraine for the rest of their life. So these are at the 30-year mark. These are the things that I continuously reflect on that bring me great pride and joy.
I suppose it's the best conclusion for our talk. Thank you, Your Excellency. And also a big thank you to our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue working for you, bringing foreign policy closer, making foreign policy more adjustable and more understandable. Please remember, foreign policy is much more interesting if you look on it through Ukrainian prism.